This Israel report is brought to you by the Blue Agency. Your Israel property is in good hands. Owning properties in Israel can be a great investment, but challenging to manage if you're based abroad. The Blue Agency will manage every aspect of your property, finding and vetting tenants, maintaining your property and getting it rental ready, negotiating contracts and collecting rentals, reporting back to you regularly. The Blue Agency has built a reputation for trust and confidentiality over 20 years. The Blue Agency, your Israel property is in good hands. Contact us at www.theblueagency.com.
The Israel Report for the latest news and insights with Anthony Reich.
Anthony Reich, Boker Tov, good morning. Hope you are well.
Boker Tov. A couple of stories that I want to just start with this morning. First of all, a positive story about a statue that was unveiled at Entebbe Airport in Uganda, showing an image of Yoni Netanyahu, who of course was Prime Minister Netanyahu's older brother, and who led the raid to Entebbe, which rescued hostages who had been kept there 50 years ago. It was exactly 50 years ago that the raid on Entebbe took place. An Israeli commando force landed at the airport in Entebbe. The story of Entebbe, for those who are not familiar with it, is fascinating, almost unbelievable, well worth reading about, well worth watching the movies about. But for me, it's interesting that the statue has now been unveiled at Entebbe Airport that shows Yoni Netanyahu, and it was unveiled by the Ugandan military. And how 50 years have changed things, because when those hostages were being held at Entebbe Airport back in 1976, and let's be clear, that there were Jewish hostages that were held, that were separated out from the other hostages on that plane. And only the Jews and the Israelis were ultimately held. And it turned out that the Ugandan government, and particularly the Ugandan president at the time, Idi Amin, were complicit with the terrorists who were holding the hostages. And they supported and helped them and provided the facility at the airport with all that they needed to assist this hostage taking. And it was only because the Israeli commandos actually had a mock-up of Idi Amin's car that they brought with them from Israel on the planes that landed at Entebbe. They had an exact mock-up of Idi Amin's car. It pulled up outside the terminal building, just as it had done almost every day before that. And inside, instead of the president Idi Amin, were the Israeli commandos who broke into the airport and ultimately rescued those hostages. So then 50 years ago, the Ugandan regime, the president and the military were helping the hostages. Today, the Ugandan military is really supporting Israel, unveiling this statue of Yoni Netanyahu and praising Israel's military, which is really fascinating how the 50 years have really changed things. So that's on the positive side. On a more negative side, and I think it is important to talk about this, we have the very, very distressing story of Bar Asraf. Bar Asraf was a 30-year-old resident of Share Tikva, and Bar's girlfriend, Liron, was a manager of the bar at the Nova Festival on October the 7th. She was there working, helping to distribute drinks and to sell drinks to the festival goers. When the attack was mounted at the festival site, Liron was administering medical assistance to people who had been injured in that terror attack on October the 7th until she herself was killed. And now, almost 3 years later, Bar, who had been doing his best to try to cope with the loss of Liron, and who had tattooed her onto himself in order to make sure that he would never forget her and that she was with him all the time, and he had visited her grave on numerous occasions, and who outwardly seemed to be sort of getting over his loss, ultimately went to her grave yesterday, and he committed suicide right next to her grave. And I think that the the horrible nature of the story shows that this is, first of all, I would emphasize that this is not a unique situation in Israel. We are still very much in shock and in post-trauma over what happened on October the 7th and the 3 years that have followed, the 3 years of war, the losses that we have suffered, the injuries, the families that have been affected, the breakups, the stress, the financial ruin that some people have gone through over the last 3 years, and the unfortunate and the very sad story of Bar and his love for Liron, and how he ultimately couldn't find a way to move on from her loss that took place almost 3 years ago, I think is a story that we see in so many corners of Israel. People trying to move on, people trying to get over their loss, people just trying to cope with whatever they're being thrown, whatever's being thrown at them right now. But unfortunately, for some people, they just can't find a way to move on, to forget, or not to forget, but to somehow recreate their lives in a different way. And unfortunately, our hearts go out to that family because they've already suffered immense loss. But Bar ultimately, unfortunately, just couldn't find his way forward without her.
Oh, what a terrible, terrible story. President Trump has given Iran another chance, and that is before, he says, decapitating it. This is one of the most confusing things, because now Iran's saying what talks. So what do we know?
Well, I think that we're all sort of really trying to work out what has led President Trump to be so public about, we are going to attack Iran, not for the first time, we're going to carry out a huge attack. He was blessing American soldiers over the weekend in a move that looked like a huge attack was about to take place. It was all then very publicly called off. It seems almost to be humiliating for the US military. I mean, it almost looks like they back down somehow, because the Iranians continue to insist that there are no talks, that these talks that President Trump speaks about, which justifies his reason for not carrying out this attack, really, those reasons don't exist at all. It's just him making things up. So it all looks very, very strange. I think, however, that ultimately there will be little choice but to go into some sort of a massive attack. I mean, we know that Israel is standing by and very enthusiastic and eager about the possibility of having another go at Iran. I'm not sure what the plans are, but clearly there are very, very carefully intelligence-led, cooked plans that Israel is very eager to carry out when the green light is given to go in. Israel will clearly not do that without the US support. And I think there's good reason for that. I don't think it's about Israel being subservient to the US and being willing to simply do whatever they're told to do by the US. I think that it's a much, much deeper and more substantial relationship between Israel and the US. Let's not forget that the US has helped Israel significantly. And even if we believe, and maybe it's true, that Israel could do this on its own, we would manage, it would be okay. But I don't think that we should underestimate the value of the help that we get from the US, whether it be those numerous refueling planes that are currently making Ben Gurion Airport a nightmare to navigate for tourists who are trying to get out of Israel for the summer and who can't find their way out because there's so much holdup at Ben Gurion because those refueling planes are taking up so much space. Those refueling planes are a critical piece of this. And if Israel didn't have access to all of those refueling planes, there is little doubt that Israel's ability to carry out an attack against Iran would be much reduced, would be really diluted in many respects. Could Israel do it without US? I'm guessing and I'm feeling sure that it would be possible, but it wouldn't be the same. And so I think we need to be acknowledge that the assistance of the US military is key for Israel in order to achieve more in less time. And I think that the time aspect is really key here. because once the attack starts, once any military escalation begins, I don't think that there'll be a great deal of time to achieve the things. I think that the first 24 to 48 hours are always key. Catch people by surprise, do things that weren't expected before, carry out attacks right away in order to catch people off guard. I think those first few hours are really key. And the more that can be achieved in those few hours, the more successful the operation will be. My belief still is that some sort of a military escalation will inevitably happen. Iran is clearly not going to cooperate. We've still got the military, the ballistic missiles that Iran points towards Israel, and that threaten not only Israel, but Western Europe and indeed the United States. We still have the issue of the nuclear program. We still have the issue of that regime in Iran, which is not only cruel towards its own people, but while that regime has in its arsenal those ballistic missiles and that nuclear program, that regime represents a major threat to world peace. And for that reason, we somehow need to deal with this. And I think that, if I'm reading the situation correctly, I think that perhaps these delays are somewhat strategic. In other words, because we feel that carrying out an attack right now might not be as effective. There might be something going on the ground that we're not aware of, which means that the attack is not well timed to be right now. I think that it would be better not to keep warning people 3, 4, 5 days before that this is about to happen. It's probably better for it just to happen without any major warning. So I think that it's still going to happen. But of course, we're still waiting around to see what exactly will transpire.
Do you think that Netanyahu's visit to the White House to Donald Trump last week has any bearing on this?
I feel sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu went with an agenda to try to convince Trump of one thing or another, the view of the Israeli government and the Israeli military. It may well have been also to present some intelligence, which the Americans might not have seen before, might not have been entirely convinced about. I have little doubt that most of the meeting time that was held between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump focused on this issue: when, how, what the objectives are, how the cooperation will take place. I've little doubt that most of their time was really focused on this issue. So I think it has had a major bearing. Yes, I think yes to that.
The Gaza Board of Peace gave a clarification to Israel's position on Hamas disarmament. Does it change anything?
I think it does, because yesterday we spoke about the fact that the Gaza Board of Peace had said, well, Hamas has agreed to disarm, and now Israel needs to comply with its side of the bargain, which is withdraw from Gaza completely and allow that disarmament process to take place. And now the clarification has been made. I think it changes a great deal. The clarification is that Israel is expected to withdraw from Gaza once the disarmament has been done. So the timing here is really critical. It changes Israel's strength in this situation, because right now Israel is justified to say, look, even though Hamas has agreed to disarm, we are not withdrawing until that disarmament has been completed. When will it be completed? Probably never, because we know that Hamas has no intention to disarm. So all that the announcement did, that was made last week, was it just gave Hamas strength to force Israel to withdraw. And I think that that point became clear when Prime Minister Netanyahu met with the representatives from the Gaza Board of Peace in order to make them understand that Israel's withdrawal at this point doesn't help anything, because we know that Hamas is never going to disarm. So by changing the order of the timing of the events, by saying Israel will withdraw, but only once the disarmament has taken place, means that Israel is at least there for the foreseeable future, because the disarmament, not only that it hasn't been completed, it hasn't really even begun. So we know that Hamas has no intention of doing this. And so now this shifts the balance of power completely back in Israel's direction. And again, we've seen Israel carrying out attacks, targeted attacks in Gaza against those who were involved in October the 7th and subsequent to that. These attacks are very, very focused, very clinical, and making sure that they really get rid of all of those protagonists who were involved in one way or another in the attacks over the last 3 years.
Anthony Reich, you are taking a few days of a very, very well-deserved break. I think the Israel Report, Israel News, the information, the expectation is relentless. So you are not going to be on air for the next few days. I believe you're back on Tuesday. Does that make sense?
That's correct. I will be back on Tuesday next week.
So wishing you a fantastic, well-deserved break. Don't think about us at all. Unless something, of course, quite dramatic happens, and then we'll think of you. But just have a very, very well-deserved break from me, and no doubt from everybody here at Chai and from our listeners. And we look forward to catching up with you on Tuesday.
Thank you. I look forward to this.
That Israel Report was brought to you by the Blue Agency. Your Israel property is in good hands. Owning properties in Israel can be a great investment, but challenging to manage if you're based abroad. The Blue Agency will manage every aspect of your property, finding and vetting tenants, maintaining your property and getting it rental ready, negotiating contracts and collecting rentals, reporting back to you regularly. The Blue Agency has built a reputation for trust and confidentiality over 20 years. The Blue Agency, your Israel property is in good hands. Contact us at www.theblueagency.com.